The United Nations has warned that South Sudan is on the brink of a renewed civil war. Violence between rival factions in the country has escalated in the last month, culminating in the arrest of first Vice President Machar last week. South Sudan opposition now says the 2018 power-sharing deal with President Salva Kiir has been invalidated by Machar's detention. So this week on the program, we look at what has caused this latest escalation, why the 2018 Revitalised Peace Agreement has not brought lasting peace, and what may lie ahead for Africa's youngest nation. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, the South Sudan civil war, which ended in 2018, was one of the most devastating in Africa's history, leaving over 400,000 people dead. Before we begin our discussion, my colleague Enoch Sikolia looks at the lead-up to the latest tensions.
The world's youngest nation, South Sudan, once again finds itself on the edge of conflict. A hard-fought and fragile peace agreement over 6 years ago is unraveling amid political infighting, armed clashes, and rising insecurity. At the center of the friction, the two old rivals, Kiir and Machar. The 2018 pact ended a brutal 5-year civil war that claimed nearly 400,000 lives. The deal was meant to usher in stability, but key provisions such as a unified army and an agreed constitution have yet to be implemented. In February 2025, Kiir dismissed several senior government officials, which Machar viewed as a violation of the peace deal, sparking protest and violence in regions such as Western Bahr el Ghazal. Subsequently, 2 ministers and the deputy army chief aligned with Machar were arrested. As political tensions grew, violence erupted in some areas like Nasir town in Upper Nile, following Kiir's order for the redeployment of forces in the area. Armed militias, including the White Army, clashed with government forces. A UN helicopter attempting to rescue soldiers was attacked, leaving a UN crew member and a South Sudanese general dead. The attack on the aircraft is a stark reminder of South Sudan's volatility. The U.S. Embassy in South Sudan has since ordered the departure of non-emergency government employees from the country. The crisis has drawn regional intervention, with the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, convening a summit to discuss the latest developments. Uganda, a key IGAD member and a Kiir ally, deployed special forces to Juba. In a post on the X platform, Ugandan Army Chief Muhoozi Kainerugaba warned, "We, the Ugandan military, UPDF, only recognize one president of South Sudan, Salva Kiir. Any move against him is a declaration of war against Uganda." Some say Uganda's intervention may complicate the situation. While it may stabilize Juba, it could also escalate tensions with opposition forces. Meanwhile, South Sudan is facing a deepening humanitarian crisis. The UN Commission on Human Rights says over 2 million people are internally displaced and 2.28 million have sought refuge in neighboring countries. It further states that more than half the population is facing acute food insecurity. The global body reiterated that without meaningful political dialogue and trust building, the country risks slipping back into full-scale conflict. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN.
Well, joining me now to unpack how South Sudan got here are from Addis Ababa, Dr. Ismail Wise, a special envoy to South Sudan from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. From Naivasha in Kenya, Dr. Hassan Khnenje, Director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, and in Nairobi, Lorna Merekaji, Secretary General of the South Sudan Democratic Engagement, Monitoring and Observation Program and Civil Rights Activist. Thank you all and welcome to the program. Lorna, let me start off with you here because tension is rising in South Sudan after Vice President Riek Machar was put under house arrest. What is your reading of the issue and what has caused this latest flare-up between President Kiir and Vice President Machar?
Well, thank you very much, Beatrice. I think first and foremost, I must say that it's a very unfortunate situation that we have a government that is supposed to be a government of national unity. It is a coalition government, but within the coalition government, the second highest ranking person in the country is arrested by the same government and put under house arrest. It is unfortunate, and to me that's a very bad indicator. We have never gone this low as South Sudan, and something needs to be done. I think the prospects of South Sudan emerging out of this crisis is only pegged on us trying to do things differently. I would like to say that South Sudan is at a point that we need to wake up to the reality that we cannot use the same formula to get a different results.
So Lorna, you're talking about the prospects of this needing a different solution, but what there are signs, though, of this impending standoff between the president and his deputy?
Well, I think the standoff between the president and his deputy is something that can be resolved if only the two prioritize the interest of the people. And I think for me that is where the angle I will look at. I think what is happening is that they are more focusing on their interest. They're focusing on what they think individually or with a few people around them, but not for the whole country. And I think that standoff will continue if they don't change that mindset or that stand.
Dr. Ismail Wise, this definitely has an implication on South Sudan's peace process. South Sudan's opposition now says that this latest development invalidates the 2018 power sharing arrangement that ended years of civil war. Where does this leave the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan?
What we think is it's not that much correct that the parties, even though they are in conflict with one another, and we are in a situation which is very critical, as she has said it, both still subscribe to the RRXS. And because of this, we as an IGAD responsible and guarantors of this peace process, we are also very much committed, in fact, for restoring the path for peace to South Sudan. And we are engaging directly and indirectly also all the concerned stakeholders of this peace process.
So, Dr. Ismaili, in your view, the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan still stands?
Well, yes. As I said, I'm very close in touch with the political parties or the five stakeholders of this political stakeholders of this agreement, even IO and SPLM-IG, SOA, and OPP and the FDs, former detainees, they are all committed, to this RRC so far. I know it is in a very, very serious situation. We never have been in this case for the last 5-6 years. It's very dangerous time, and if things does not go well, that this agreement might collapse. But it's still, as far as we stand today, the agreement still holds. And the parties are still subscribing to the peace agreement.
Right. Dr. Khnenje, what is your view here? What do you see?
The current, escalation has brought back the urgency of resolving the conflict. I do agree with the previous speaker. The agreement is not dead, however, it's actually in the ICU. And I think depending on the success is going to be registered by the current African Union, efforts as well as regional efforts, if they're going to manage to bring the parties back to the negotiating table so that they stick, at least at the very least, to the 2018 agreement, then there is a likelihood that we are going to see some progress. But in case there's going to be a prolonged stalemate, then there's a real danger of South Sudan relapsing back into conflict in a very, very serious way, as evidenced by the recent skirmishes that has claimed hundreds of lives.
Lorna, your take, what is likely to happen, though, if this standoff between President Kiir and Machar is not quickly resolved?
Well, thank you very much. I would like to mention one thing, that we keep saying that the agreement, but I think one of the things that we are missing is that what is happening in South Sudan is that a sitting government is actually overthrowing a constitution, because the agreement has been incorporated into the constitution. So this to me is a major problem that requires an attention that goes beyond just talking about the relationship between the two or the standoff between the two, but then rather what exactly does this mean to a team that is governing a country, and the whole element of having a constitution in place.
So Dr. Kaneje, we've heard about the flurry of activity that is happening now with the peace process, with the crisis in South Sudan. But one has to ask, why haven't past peace agreements held so far?
You know, if you put traffic lights, you still need police to be able to enforce it. Now, just like peace agreements, you need an enforcement mechanism that can be monitored, but also hold parties to account. And what we've had so far is the enforcement mechanism in terms of third parties or even guarantors have been actually fairly weak, in part because of the nature of the constitution of those mechanisms, but in part also because just lack of sufficient leverage and a united approach in trying to enforce the agreement. And so I think going forward, whatever is going to be agreed on, there has to be an indication that there is going to be sufficient enforcement ability by powerful third parties or guarantors to hold the parties to account. Because once the parties, either in working together or separately, violates the critical pieces of an agreement, and there is no action that is taken, either from an incentive or disincentive perspective, then you're going to see a series and serial violations of these agreements. And I think that has contributed largely, apart from the fact that, of course, there are other internal dynamics as well as regional politics that may have contributed to the kind of crisis we see today.
Lorna, I want to get your input in this, because the agreement, as we've been talking about, it was really aimed at ending South Sudan's civil war, and it was a power-sharing arrangement. You've mentioned it several here. What key pillars of that revitalized agreement have so far been implemented? Which ones have faced implementation challenges, and why?
Well, thank you very much. We have always talked about the issue of political will. We basically... Personally, I believe that the agreement was a very good document. If you look at the content of the agreement, it's really good. And I would like to say that in a nutshell, I would say that three dimensions to the contents of the agreement. There is a security dimension, and there is a political dimension, but then there is a very technical dimension to the agreement. I think the implementation of the agreement failed because the political leaders in South Sudan are not able to coordinate that and be able to advance the process. And you can clearly see from how they report about the implementation of the agreement. And I usually say that in governance, you don't look at it in a linear way. Governance is a multifaceted process. But you would hear South Sudanese high-level government officials say we have implemented Article 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't move like that. So I think the challenge is those implementing the agreement. I would like to say that they perhaps do not quite understand this agreement. And that is the challenge. They need to understand the agreement.
Dr. Ismail Wise, so in your engagement with stakeholders, what challenges has IGAD faced in ensuring the full implementation of the revised agreement?
The biggest challenge we are facing with our partners is lack of trust and confidence, and also lack of political will of the leaders, of the South Sudanese leaders. This is honestly the most important challenge we are facing. This does not mean that there is no solution for these three things. There are, but also they were sometimes also hesitating to accept this kind of solutions. We thought about bringing them regularly to a leadership forum, and meetings would help in order to discuss the challenge they are also personally facing with one another. And we have planned a series of meetings for the leadership, but unfortunately this was turned down, and that is the main challenge this agreement is facing. So what we see is that they are not really very serious about the implementation of the security arrangement. This is the backbone, and even the current incident in Nasir would not have been necessary and would not have happened. I urge the partners of this peace agreement to really to be serious, because this is what the South Sudanese people in general need this time.
All right, we're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we will look at what the future holds for the young nation. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Still with me are Dr. Ismail Wise, Dr. Hassan Kenenje, and Lorna Merekaje. Before the break, we looked at how South Sudan got here. Let's now look at what the future may hold for this country. Lorna, can South Sudan achieve long-term stability under the current agreement, or does it need a new political arrangement?
Well, thank you very much, Beatrice. That's the right question. I think definitely, without fear of contradiction, South Sudan needs a new political arrangement. What we have right now has not worked, and the agreement is a document that was built based on assumption that there's trust, based on the assumption that those who will be implementing surely prioritize the interests of the country above personal or party interests. But unfortunately, we have been shown clearly that that is not the case. So I think the best way forward for South Sudan is to go back to the drawing board and be able to have a new arrangement, an arrangement that allows for other South Sudanese to get on board, an arrangement that allows for South Sudanese citizens to be able to own up to the first line of our constitution, we the people. Where are the people in all this? That needs to be brought to play so that we are able to reclaim the South Sudan that we all wanted. But it can be done, Beatrice.
Dr. Kenenje, in your view, though, what is required? Because in its 13 years as an independent country, South Sudan has been plagued by political, economic stability. What would be that one key challenge that you're seeing from where you're sitting that is preventing any peace in South Sudan?
One is build strong institutions. One of the challenges that South Sudan is facing that is making it relapse into this crisis is because the institutions of governance as well as security are extremely weak. To the extent that you have a very divided, army, for instance, to the extent that, the electoral body is virtually, dysfunctional, to the extent that the judiciary is doubting to get what it does, I think this is critical. So it cannot, the only way to build the confidence of the citizens to be able to earn the legitimacy and authority that, they require, these institutions have to be weak to offer hope and promise, not just of their safety and security, but that there is actually hope for economic development when it comes to state formation and state making. Because today, the state has become, by and large, predatory in ways in which the average citizen is not profiting, much. And that makes it easy for instance, conflict profiteers to actually mobilize people against, to conduct malign activities, as well as rise against the government. And so, strengthen the institutions, as well as a new political and constitutional dispensation is going to be key to South Sudan's future.
Dr. Ismail Wise, you did mention earlier that there is a lack of political will. So how does IGAD, as the guarantor of the Revitalised Agreement, how does IGAD monitor compliance, and what actions does it take if there are violations?
Frankly speaking, South Sudanese have already done several agreements. The last one was, for example, 2015 agreement, and now 2018. If they go back again to the drawing table and they sit and they have a new agreement, there is no guarantee if the situation remains the same and the mentality of the people remain the same, that agreement will also be implemented. What we need is a change of attitude of the South Sudanese leaders, not in fact a new agreement. This one, as said, is a very good agreement, and it needs to be just implemented like it was supposed to be implemented 4 years ago. And now, to your question, IGAD, for example, has, in drawing this agreement, taken the mistakes of the last agreement in 2015 and tried to correct some of those things which didn't go well. For example, in that agreement, there was 18 or 17 reservations that President Salva Kiir Mayardit himself had it against the agreement. Now, to 2018, neither the president nor the other political stakeholders had one single reservation about this agreement. Number two, we tried to learn from the last 2015 agreement, and you remember when that agreement was concluded, the three special envoys all went home, and the agreement implementation was left alone to the South Sudanese stakeholders. In 2018 agreement, IGAD had created a very strong structure in Juba, and we have an office of the special envoy in South Sudan. We had it more than 8 or 10 experts to support the government in the implementation of this peace agreement. This agreement should be, should be implemented by South Sudanese, not by IGAD, and it can only be implemented if they really have the will and the political faith among themselves, and they decide, in fact, for that to that implementation. Drawing a new agreement will not bring any change unless and until the attitude of the South Sudanese leaders change.
All right. So, Lorna, what does your country require, though, in order to move forward? What sort of initiatives also do you think negotiators should prioritize to ensure long-term peace and stability in your country?
Well, thank you very much. I have a different opinion to what Ismail Wais has said. I do respect your opinion, Ismail Wais, but allow me to differ. I think why I'm saying that we need a different agreement, we need to go back to the drawing board, not necessarily changing so much in our asses, but including other actors on board, because at the moment, one of the things that internationals may not have picked, the friends of South Sudan may not have picked, is that the South Sudanese political elite or the political actors that are mentioned in the agreement make it look that they are the only people to implement the agreement. And you have clearly seen that if anything to do with agreement or anything to do with governance of South Sudan during this process, either SPLM-IG, SPLM-IO, SOA, OPP, they and FD seem to be the only names that are at play. And that is quite difficult for South Sudan to move forward, because we have clearly seen that this segments of Artigonu are the same people that have been running the country since before independence. So the fact that they have spectacularly failed to take South Sudan forward, it means that there's a serious capacity challenge. And I think I strongly believe that for South Sudan to move forward, we need to go back to the drawing board.
Right. So I want to get your winding up remarks. And let me start off with you, Dr. Kanyenje. Given the ongoing challenges, what signs of peace suggest that stability is achievable in South Sudan? Is peace achievable?
Peace is achievable because continued conflict is not sustainable and should never be an option. I think one thing that is going to be needed beyond the political will is never really just given, has to be extracted from the parties. Ensuring that the agreement sticks is going to require a combination of credible carrots as well as sticks. And the ongoing efforts, I think, for them to be successful they're going to come to terms with the reality that a semblance of an enforcement framework is going to be needed to hold parties to account, but also to continuously engage to ensure that whatever items have been reached, they're actually implemented to the letter. What has been happening is an agreement is reached, then people pack things and go home, and then they leave parties to themselves. And what the parties in South Sudan have proved is they're unable to actually solve the problems by themselves, especially when it's being fronted by men and women in uniform with guns. And so the agency of the South Sudanese citizens, for instance, has been missing largely from this theater. Those things need to be thought about and included in a process that is going to reflect the aspirations and desires as well as the complexities of the South Sudan theater.
Dr. Ismaila Wise, given your engagements with stakeholders, do you think peace is achievable in South Sudan?
The South Sudanese had enough experience of violence, and they are tired of fighting and killing. All these negative connotations which are now attached to South Sudan, and at last they want to live in peace and in prosperity, just like all the people and citizens of the region, whether it is Ethiopia, Djibouti, Kenya, Uganda, or Somalia. The political leaders have to really listen to the will of the people, and this makes it very essential and important that peace should be the primary objective of the South Sudanese leaders. Yes, peace is achievable, and they have the support of the region and the international community who are there ready, in fact, to assist them to achieve this peace process. What is very much important, as I said, and I repeat it again, no agreement could save the South Sudanese unless the leaders of South Sudan change their attitude toward the peace process in South Sudan.
Lorna, are you seeing signs of hope that suggest that stability could one day be achievable?
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Beatrice. We are optimistic, but it's not something that will be served on silver platter. I know for a fact, and many of us know for a fact, that we have a difficult task ahead of us. The situation has been complicated further, and we really need to exert more efforts, but most importantly, positive efforts, because one of the things that we have been seeing, in as much as I'm saying that there are technocrats and the South Sudan requires more people on the ground and more people to engage in governance of the country, the political class are also dividing the society. The society is highly divided. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I am optimistic that we'll be able to restore peace and stability in South Sudan. And my advice to international friends that are coming to help South Sudan is kindly understand South Sudan beyond the rhetorics of the political actors, because we know for a fact that the political actors would say one thing and do a different thing. And one example that has been the buzzing statement in South Sudan is what the president has said, beautifully crafted. I will never take the country back to war. But the country is almost at war right now. So I think the international community need to listen to South Sudanese beyond the political actors. But there's hope. We will emerge out of this victorious, hopefully.
Indeed, and on that optimistic note, we'll leave it there on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guest, Dr. Ismaila Wise, Special Envoy to South Sudan from the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, Dr. Hassan Kanenje, Director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies, and Lorna Merekaje, Secretary General of the South Sudan Democratic Engagement, Monitoring and Observation Program, and civil rights activist. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation online through our social media handles on Facebook and X. You can also catch this show on our YouTube playlist. Do keep the conversation going and join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's goodbye.